Emily stepped out of her Chicago apartment at exactly 7:30 a.m. The morning air was sharp, but the crowd felt thin. She turned toward the subway entrance and stopped. 20 feet away, a man stood motionless. He was there yesterday. He was there the day before. She quickened her pace, weaving through the morning commuters. But when she glanced back, he was still 20 feet behind, matching her stride with rhythmic precision. At the corner, she ducked into the coffee shop, heart hammering against her ribs. She ordered her black coffee, eyes darting to the window. He stood on the sidewalk, humming. She froze. The melody drifting through the glass was the exact track playing in her AirPods. She pulled them out, the silence in her ears deafening. He turned his head, locking eyes with her through the pain, and tapped his fingers against his thigh in time with the song she had just paused. She gripped her cup until her knuckles turned white. It was not a coincidence. Every turn she took, every stop she made, he was there, a shadow that knew her schedule better than she did. She walked faster, her breath hitching, but the distance between them remained fixed, a tether that refused to break. The city felt smaller, the walls of the streets closing in. The air inside felt stale, heavy with a presence that did not belong. She stepped into the hallway, scanning the floor, the shadows, the corners. Everything was in its place. The coat rack was upright. The mail was on the table. She exhaled, a ragged sound, and moved toward the living room. The calendar application was active, displaying her schedule for the entire week. Every appointment, every gym visit, every late-night shift was highlighted in red. She backed away, her hands trembling as she reached for her phone. The sanctuary was gone. She spent the next hour in a blur of motion. She went online, ordered a security camera, and pointed it toward the bedroom window. She sat in the dark, watching the red light of the sensor blink. The clock on the nightstand ticked toward 3 a.m. The room was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Emily lay rigid, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Her phone, resting on the pillow beside her, suddenly lit up. A sharp, digital chime cut through the stillness. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat like a jagged stone. She tapped the icon. The application loaded, the screen flickering to life with a grainy, black and white feed. At first, there was only the dark outline of the trees outside. Then, a figure stepped into the frame. It was him. He stood inches from the glass, his face pressed against the pane, his eyes locked onto the camera lens. He was not hiding. He was waiting. Emily felt the blood drain from her face, her limbs turning to lead. She could not move, could not scream, could not look away. On the screen, his lips curled into a slow, deliberate smile. He raised his hand, palm flat against the glass, and began to wave. His fingers moved in a rhythmic, measured pattern, a silent greeting meant only for her, then to a different state, crossing borders like a ghost. She deleted her social media, burned her old SIM card, and changed her name on every document she could touch. For 2 weeks, the silence was a relief. Then, she went to a local park, reading a newspaper, his posture relaxed and familiar. She did not scream. She stood up, walked to her car, and drove until the sun went down. The text message glowed on the floor, a digital anchor to her terror. Emily did not look away. She could not. Her eyes tracked the light from the screen as it flickered against the hardwood. Then, the light shifted. A long, dark shape detached itself from the corner. Then, the sound began. A soft, rhythmic tapping. It came from the glass pane behind her. Once, twice, 3 times. The rusted gate of Oakridge High groaned, a long, screeching protest against the crowbar. Mark shoved his weight forward, the metal giving way with a final, jarring snap. Behind him, Sarah and Leo moved into the courtyard, their flashlights carving narrow beams through the thick, stagnant air. The school had been abandoned for a decade. Every window was a jagged hole, and the silence here felt heavy. They stepped into the main hallway, their boots crunching rhythmically on a carpet of shattered glass. Mark stopped, pulling his phone from his pocket. He held it up, rotating his wrist, searching for a single bar of service. Nothing. The signal was dead. He looked at Sarah and Leo, his face illuminated by the harsh, flickering light. The air grew colder, smelling of dust and wet concrete. They were deep inside now, past the point of easy retreat. They stood in the center of the hallway, the silence absolute. Then, the clock hit midnight. A mechanical shriek erupted from the walls, a sound so sharp it vibrated through the floorboards and rattled their teeth. The trio froze, flashlights shaking as the noise echoed endlessly. Down the long corridor, the heavy wooden doors of the classrooms began to swing open, one after another, in perfect, rhythmic unison. The sound of wood hitting wood echoed like a series of gunshots. Sarah grabbed Mark's arm, her grip tight enough to bruise. They sprinted toward the nearest room, the light from their torches cutting through the swirling dust. They skidded to a halt in the doorway. Inside, the furniture had been rearranged. Every desk had been dragged into a precise, tight circle in the center of the room. The air inside smelled of ozone and something metallic. Mark stepped forward, his boots scuffing the floor, and pointed his light at the blackboard. A thick, crimson liquid was dripping down the slate in slow, heavy beads. It pooled on the floor, forming words. "You have returned." Leo scrambled to grab the camera, his fingers trembling as he brushed dust from the lens. He held the screen up, his breath hitching in his throat. The hallway behind them, empty and dark to the naked eye, was alive on the monitor. It was packed with figures sitting at desks that had not been there a second ago. They were writing in notebooks, their movements stiff, rhythmic, and perfectly synchronized. Leo stumbled back, the camera shaking in his grip. Mark lunged forward, grabbing the device to point it directly at the empty corridor. The lens saw only swirling dust and deep, hollow shadows. He looked back at the screen. The figures were still there, hunched over their work, their pens scratching against paper in a soundless, frantic blur. Mark tapped the display, his thumbs smearing the glass, but the image remained. Then, the scratching stopped. Every figure in the frame paused. In a single, chilling motion, they turned their heads toward the camera. Their eyes were fixed on the lens, staring through the screen and directly into the room. Mark lowered the camera, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The hallway remained empty, but the weight of those unseen gazes filled the air. A sudden freezing wind tore through the room, smelling of ancient dust and decay. It slammed the classroom door shut with a force that rattled the window panes. The heavy wood clicked into place, locking them inside. Sarah lunged for the handle, her fingers clawing at the cold metal, but it refused to budge. She screamed, a sharp, jagged sound that died instantly against the walls. Mark dropped the camera and threw his shoulder against the wood, his boots sliding on the floorboards as he pushed with everything he had. The door did not even shudder. It was as if the frame had been welded into the stone. Behind them, the lights flickered, casting long, erratic shadows that danced across the rows of desks. Then, the sound began, a low, rhythmic creaking of wood under pressure. One by one, the empty desks began to settle, the floorboards groaning as if bearing the weight of invisible bodies. Mark turned, his breath hitching in his throat. The empty spaces were filling. He could see the dust motes swirling around the seats, displaced by something he could not see but could feel pressing against the air. The room was shrinking, the walls vibrating with a low, hummed frequency that made his teeth ache. They were no longer just observers. They were becoming a part of its inventory. The morning sun cut through the shattered windows, illuminating the dust that hung suspended in the stagnant air. Police officers pushed open the rusted gates, their boots echoing through the silent courtyard. They moved through the main hallway, the silence heavy and absolute. In the history classroom, the door stood slightly ajar. Inside, Mark sat alone in the third-row desk. He did not look up. He did not acknowledge the flashlight sweeping over the peeling walls. His hand gripped a piece of chalk, moving in a frantic, endless loop against the blackboard. An officer stepped forward, reaching out to touch his shoulder, but Mark did not turn. He simply continued to write, his movements stiff and mechanical. He was part of the architecture, a permanent fixture in the school's long, dark history.